She packed light. Just one small suitcase, a Bible, and a handwritten note tucked into her purse. Time to rest. Time to heal. For Dana, the church retreat wasn't just a weekend getaway, it was a lifeline. 3 years of a marriage that had been slowly slipping through her fingers. Late-night absences. Locked phones. Cold stares that once carried warmth. Her friends told her to pray. Her pastor told her to hold on. And so she did. Until the moment she stepped onto that retreat bus, and saw her. A child. No older than 5. With her husband's eyes. The woman beside the child wore a wedding band identical to Dana's. Same inscription. Same date. The only difference, this woman wasn't wearing guilt. She was wearing pride. And the man standing between them? Dana's husband, Thomas. Smiling. As if this were normal. What started as a quiet weekend of worship in Northern California became the epicenter of a crime that left one woman dead, a child traumatized, and a community shattered. The police would uncover layers of deceit that went back nearly a decade. But before the law arrived, before the sirens echoed through the retreat grounds, something unthinkable happened. A confession. A confrontation. And then, silence. Tonight, we unpack every detail. Every whispered phone call. Every blurred photo. Every page from the hidden journal that told the truth no one wanted to face. This is the story of a wife. A husband. A lie that stretched across 2 families. And the moment that lie turned deadly. Stay with us. Because once you hear the end, you'll never forget the beginning. It was Friday morning, just after sunrise, when the buses began arriving at the Cedar Grove Spiritual Retreat Center. Nestled in the quiet hills of Mendocino County, California, it was the kind of place where cell service dropped off, where silence wrapped itself around the trees, and where people came to hear from God, or, perhaps, from themselves. Dana Harris had never missed the annual women's retreat. For her, it was more than tradition. It was where she met Thomas for the first time, 11 years ago. Back then, he was the guest youth speaker, a charming, articulate man whose voice held both conviction and comfort. She was newly saved, fresh out of a broken engagement, drawn to his kindness and steadiness. They fell in love fast, married faster, and built what looked like a picture-perfect union. To the outside world, Dana and Thomas were a power couple in the faith community. She led women's prayer circles, while he moved up quickly in ministry, eventually pastoring a fast-growing church in the East Bay. They preached about family, commitment, and sacrifice. Their social media feeds were full of scriptures, matching holiday sweaters, and smiling selfies from pulpit stages. But privately, things had changed. 2 years before the retreat, Dana had started noticing the gaps. First, it was the excuses. Late meetings. Out-of-town revivals. Then, the passwords on every device. The silence when she walked into the room. The name, Alyssa, she saw once on his phone, the name he swore belonged to a church assistant. When she confronted him, he'd simply smiled and quoted scripture. Love keeps no record of wrongs, Dana. By the time she stepped onto the gravel lot of the retreat center that Friday morning, she was tired of pretending, tired of doubting her own instincts. But she wasn't prepared for what she was about to find. Retreat organizers kept a roster of attending families and volunteers. It was a small, intimate event, less than 40 participants, mostly women and their spouses who helped with logistics. As Dana made her way to the welcome tent, she spotted a group gathered near the dining hall. There, standing casually near the juice table, was Thomas, holding a toddler. Dana's breath caught. The child had curly hair the same shade as Thomas's. Her dimples were unmistakable. Dana froze, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Then came Alyssa. She wore a gold pendant with a cross, her hands full of sippy cups and baby wipes. She smiled at Thomas, leaned in close, kissed his cheek. Dana couldn't move. Couldn't speak. It was like watching a life that wasn't hers, but one that somehow had everything that belonged to her. Later that evening, Dana didn't attend the welcome dinner. She stayed in her cabin, staring at her Bible, trying to suppress the questions flooding her mind. She hadn't told anyone. Not yet. But something had shifted. By the next morning, she was gone. Her roommate woke to an empty bed. Her suitcase was still there, but her purse and phone were missing. By noon, retreat leaders began searching the property. They found her car parked exactly where she'd left it, keys still in the ignition. Hours passed. Then a full day. Still, no Dana. Sunday afternoon, a retreat staffer discovered a broken phone hidden beneath the porch of the guest lodge. It was Dana's. That was when the sheriff's office was called. What followed was a week-long search, a media storm, and a confession that would shake the foundation of two families and their entire church community. The truth wasn't just scandalous. It was devastating. And it had only begun to surface. Thomas Elijah Harris was a name that echoed in pulpits across California. At 39, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had fought for his place in the world. Born in Baton Rouge, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts to keep him in private school, Thomas was both brilliant and charismatic. He had a way of making everyone feel seen. Heard. Believed in. By his mid-20s, he was preaching to packed auditoriums. By 30, he'd founded his own church, New Light Ministries, in a strip mall that soon transformed into a state-of-the-art worship center. His sermons were electrifying. He quoted scripture like poetry, connected it to everyday struggles with uncanny ease. People cried under his voice. Gave their lives to Christ. Donated generously. But what many didn't see, what few dared question, was Thomas's need to control every narrative. Every detail. Even his marriage. Dana Michelle Harris was the kind of woman others leaned on. At 35, she was poised, deeply spiritual, and fiercely loyal. Born and raised in Oakland, the oldest of 3 sisters, she had always played the role of the steady one. The fixer. The peacemaker. She met Thomas when she was volunteering at a youth revival. He said he saw purpose in her posture. She said she saw a man after God's own heart. Their courtship was short. The wedding, grand. Dana gave up her marketing career to help build the church. She coordinated events, counseled couples, even led worship when the music minister quit. Their bond looked unbreakable. But behind closed doors, Dana had questions she was afraid to ask, and answers Thomas made sure she'd never get. Then there was Alyssa Monroe. 28. Bright. Soft-spoken. Originally from San Diego. She'd started attending New Light Ministries just after the pandemic lockdowns lifted. She was new in town, working as a school counselor. No family nearby. She volunteered quietly at first, helping with children's church, setting up food drives. Within 6 months, she was hired as a part-time admin. Then, a year later, she was pregnant. When asked, she said the father wasn't involved. No one pressed. The church rallied around her. Baby showers. Donations. Meal trains. And all the while, Thomas made public statements about supporting single mothers and loving those who have made mistakes but still matter deeply to God. What the congregation didn't know, what even Alyssa's closest friends didn't suspect, was that she wasn't raising that child alone. She was raising her daughter with Thomas. Their secret was buried deep. Hidden in rental receipts, burner phones, off-site meetups, and elaborate lies. Lies that Dana never could quite prove, but always felt in her gut. Among the retreat guests that weekend was Jordan Carter, a family friend and associate pastor at New Light Ministries. He was the first to notice Dana's absence at breakfast that Saturday. He'd known her since college. Knew her routines. knew something was wrong. Also attending was April Simmons, Dana's childhood best friend. April was the one who helped Dana pack for the retreat. The one she confided in weeks before, whispering, "If something happens to me, check his laptop." Then, there was Alyssa, who, until that weekend, believed she was the only woman Thomas had truly loved. And finally, the child. Just shy of 2 years old. A little girl named Naomi, who bore the features of a man now under suspicion for a crime that would shake a church, destroy a marriage, and leave one woman dead. The players had been introduced. But no one, not even those closest to the family, was ready for the revelations that were about to unfold. Under a warm June sun, nestled in the pine-covered hills of northern Georgia, a marriage retreat promised healing, growth, and peace. The center was a secluded resort built for reflection, silent trails, rustic cabins, and cozy fire pits where couples shared vulnerable truths and gentle laughter. For Mariah Jennings and her husband, Anthony, it was supposed to be a new beginning. After 12 years of marriage, 2 children, and countless storms weathered together, this trip marked a fresh start. Mariah, a 39-year-old school administrator from Atlanta, was respected, grounded, and deeply devoted to her family. Her friends called her the rock, the one who always held things together, even when everything around her crumbled. Anthony, on the other hand, was charming, witty, and, on the surface, the model husband. A real estate developer with sharp suits and an easy smile, he knew how to read a room and leave people impressed. They arrived at the retreat like many others, smiles on their faces, luggage in hand, carrying a silent hope that something could be salvaged. But beneath Mariah's polite laughter and Anthony's confident aura, tension simmered. There had been distance lately. Missed calls. Late meetings. Hollow apologies. Mariah couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she had learned to bury suspicion with prayer and patience. Among the 20 or so couples present, the Jennings were quiet observers. They listened during sessions on intimacy, trust, and communication. They took notes. Participated when asked. But Mariah often found herself staring at Anthony during these talks, studying the way he avoided eye contact when the word honesty was mentioned, how he fiddled with his phone during breaks, always slightly turned away from her. On the 3rd day of the retreat, everything changed. That morning, Anthony excused himself from the morning devotion to take a work call. Something about his tone didn't sit right with Mariah. He left his tablet behind, an oversight she would later call divine intervention. A single notification lit up the screen: "You forgot Zuri's dentist appointment again. Call me when you can. Love you. Zuri." Mariah blinked. The name didn't belong to anyone she knew. She tapped the message. A string of texts unfolded, like a slow-motion avalanche. Photos of a little girl with Anthony's eyes. Heart emojis. Voice notes calling him, babe. References to a house in Buckhead. School runs. A life she never knew existed. Her knees buckled. Within minutes, everything she believed about her husband unraveled. He had another family. A woman named Chantel. A child. And based on the messages, it had been going on for years. The same man who prayed with her every night, was tucking another child into bed when he claimed to be at work late. Mariah didn't cry. Not at first. She sat in silence, heart racing, chest tightening, unable to breathe through the weight of betrayal. She waited for Anthony to return. She didn't confront him immediately. Instead, she watched him. Listened closely to every excuse he made for where he'd been. She asked questions she already knew the answers to. The more he lied, the more her anger burned. And then, that evening, under a sky speckled with stars and a campfire meant for healing, Mariah walked away from the circle and never returned. What happened next would shake their entire community, and leave one person dead. The crime was no longer just betrayal. It was murder. And the retreat that was supposed to save a marriage, became the scene of a chilling, unexpected end. It was just after 10:40 p.m. when the last of the retreat participants extinguished their lanterns and slipped back into their cabins. The woods around the property grew still. No wind. No birds. Just the soft creaking of branches and the distant hum of crickets in the thick Georgia night. Mariah Jennings hadn't returned to the group's final evening circle. No one thought much of it. Some couples had opted out to spend time alone. But inside Cabin 9, where she and Anthony had been assigned, a storm was quietly building behind closed doors. Anthony had walked in expecting silence. Maybe a cold shoulder. Maybe a drawn-out talk about forgiveness. What he didn't expect was to find Mariah sitting in the corner of the room, motionless, tablet in her lap, the screen still lit. He opened his mouth to speak, but she raised her hand. "Don't," she said, barely above a whisper. He froze. There was no shouting. No screaming. Just the slow, deliberate unfolding of everything she had discovered. The messages. The photos. The calls. She showed him timestamps, dates, nights he claimed to be stuck in traffic, attending late meetings, helping clients. It had all been a lie. And yet, he didn't deny it. Not this time. He stared at her in silence, jaw tense, hands clenched by his sides. Mariah's voice trembled when she finally asked the question that had haunted her since morning. "How many years, Anthony?" His response was cold. Emotionless. 4. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just betrayal. It was years of deception. A child. A home. A life built with another woman, while pretending to nurture one with Mariah. She asked him why. Over and over again. But the answers didn't matter anymore. The man she thought she knew was gone. The hours stretched on. The arguments escalated. Items were thrown. A lamp shattered. Chairs were pushed aside. According to later witness statements from nearby cabins, muffled voices turned into yelling. Furniture scraped the floor. Someone pounded a wall. And then, silence. At 1:12 a.m., a guest in cabin 11 called the resort manager, reporting what sounded like a violent argument next door. Security arrived 7 minutes later. They knocked on cabin 9. No answer. They knocked again. Nothing. Eventually, they used the manager's key to open the door. Mariah was standing in the middle of the room, her blouse stained red, her eyes hollow. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She simply held out her hands and said 4 words. "I didn't mean to." Anthony lay sprawled beside the bed, a thick pool of blood seeping into the carpet. A ceramic lamp base lay cracked on the floor. His head was bleeding. There were defensive wounds on his arms, cuts, bruises, signs of a struggle. The sheriff's department was called in immediately. Deputies arrived within 20 minutes. They secured the scene, photographed the evidence, and began questioning guests. Mariah was escorted to a patrol car without handcuffs. She didn't resist. She didn't run. She simply repeated the same words. "I didn't mean to." She told investigators that during their fight, Anthony had grabbed her arm, shoved her. She reached for whatever was nearby, a lamp on the nightstand, and swung it. Once. Twice. She said she wasn't trying to kill him. She just wanted him to stop. But the autopsy later revealed otherwise. Anthony suffered multiple blunt force trauma injuries to the head. The fatal blow fractured his skull. Medical examiners noted the angle and force suggested rage, far beyond what might be expected from a moment of self-defense. Mariah's hands bore bruises. Her right wrist had a small fracture. There were scratches across her collarbone and side. Some consistent with defensive injuries. Others, more difficult to explain. When asked if there were weapons in the room, she said no. But a small paring knife was recovered in the bathroom sink, washed, but still bearing traces of blood along the handle. It hadn't been used in the fatal blow, but it raised more questions than answers. Investigators discovered a handwritten letter in Mariah's suitcase, dated 2 days before the retreat. In it, she detailed her suspicions, her heartbreak, and her plan to confront Anthony. She ended the note with one chilling line. "I don't know what I'll do if he lies to me again." The crime shocked their church, their neighborhood, the entire community. A woman known for grace and composure, now accused of killing her husband in a cabin meant for healing. But the most haunting part? Hours after the incident, while being processed at the sheriff's office, Mariah whispered to the female deputy who took her fingerprints. "I just wanted the truth. That's all I ever wanted." Deputies from the Fulton County Sheriff's Department arrived at the retreat center within 20 minutes of the 911 call. The moment they stepped into Cabin 9, the scene told a story that words could barely contain. The room was quiet now, too quiet, like the air had frozen in place, unsure whether to move forward or backward. The furniture was in disarray. Blood smeared the baseboards. Shards of ceramic lay scattered across the carpet like breadcrumbs of rage. A lamp cord dangled from the wall, its bulb shattered. The smell of iron lingered heavily in the air. Anthony's body lay crumpled beside the bed, half turned, eyes still open. The medical team pronounced him dead at the scene. His pulse had stopped long before help had arrived. One glance at the back of his head was enough to confirm the fatal blow. A deep, open wound, consistent with blunt force trauma. Mariah Jennings, seated quietly at the edge of the mattress, stared down at her hands. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply looked up when Detective Rosalind Carruthers entered and said softly, "I didn't think it would go that far." The team immediately began processing the room. Every item was photographed, logged, and bagged. Blood samples were taken from 5 separate areas. The broken lamp was retrieved and packaged as evidence. Anthony's phone, face down near the bathroom doorway, was secured. Its lock screen showed a text notification, a message from a contact labeled Denise. The first breakthrough came within the hour. While reviewing the cabin's surveillance-adjacent hallway footage, standard at the retreat center for security, investigators spotted Anthony stepping out briefly around 8:12 p.m., whispering on a phone call. Audio was limited, but it was clear he was anxious. He paced back and forth outside for 7 minutes. Then re-entered the cabin and never came out again. Detectives began their standard canvass of other retreat attendees. Several guests in neighboring cabins reported hearing shouting, glass breaking, and what they described as, the kind of scream that doesn't come from anger, but from betrayal. One couple, the Duncans, staying in cabin 10, claimed they overheard a female voice say, "I read everything. You have a whole child," followed by loud thudding sounds. Meanwhile, Mariah was transported to the county holding facility and placed in a private interview room. She was read her rights and asked if she would speak without an attorney present. She nodded yes. Mariah Jennings was formally charged with second-degree murder and voluntary manslaughter. Her defense attorney, Rachel Porter, argued that her client acted in self-defense, citing the bruising on her wrist and collarbone. But prosecutors weren't convinced. They emphasized the planning evident in the letter, the evidence of multiple strikes, and the presence of the knife. The arrest shook the community. News outlets swarmed the retreat center. Social media erupted with speculation. Was this the unraveling of a woman pushed too far, or a calculated act disguised as a desperate one? The question would soon be brought before a jury. But even before the first court date, public opinion had already begun to splinter. Some saw a betrayed wife who finally snapped. Others saw a murderer hiding behind her pain. The investigation, though thorough, left holes. Why had Anthony gone outside that night to make a call? Who was Denise, and why hadn't she come forward? And then came another shock. A week after Mariah's arrest, Denise Matthews, the woman carrying Anthony's child, walked into the precinct on her own. Her face was pale. Her hands trembled as she placed Anthony's spare phone on the counter. "He told me he was filing for divorce," she said. "He said the retreat was just closure. He said it was already over with her." What detectives found on that second phone would change everything. They didn't expect what they found. There were messages, thousands of them. Between Anthony and Denise. Between Anthony and two other women, whose names were redacted in the preliminary reports. But it wasn't just infidelity. It was deception at a level that suggested Anthony had been living multiple lives, carefully constructed, meticulously managed. He hadn't just hidden a child. He had been juggling two households, two futures, and more than a few lies to maintain it all. Among the most damning discoveries was a voice memo, recorded 2 days before the retreat. Anthony's voice came through faintly, as though he were speaking while pacing. "She's going to find out soon. I'm tired of hiding it all. I can't lie to her anymore, but I also can't lose everything. If she flips. God help me." The timestamp matched the day Mariah packed her bags and left her job early, telling her supervisor she was feeling unwell. Detectives reviewed phone tower pings. She'd spent 2 hours parked outside Anthony's second apartment that same afternoon. They now had reason to believe she had followed him earlier than she claimed. In court, the prosecution introduced these elements slowly, deliberately, painting a picture of premeditation. They showed the jury the letter Mariah wrote, carefully printed, dated, and folded into a diary, where she spoke of a woman's silence being the loudest scream and his unborn child being the final betrayal. The defense fought back with equal force. Attorney Rachel Porter argued that the letter wasn't a blueprint for murder, but the heartbroken reflections of a woman pushed into emotional ruin. She brought in character witnesses, former students, co-workers, a neighbor who had once seen Mariah feed a homeless man every Sunday morning. They testified to her kindness, her generosity, her reputation for forgiveness. But under cross-examination, even those sympathies began to fracture. When asked why she didn't leave Anthony, why she traveled with him to a retreat instead of confronting him at home, Mariah hesitated. Her voice cracked. "Because I wanted to look him in the eyes. I needed to see if he would lie again." But the prosecution pounced. And when he did? A long pause. "I broke." The courtroom hung on that word. Simple. Heavy. Dangerous. Over the course of the trial, experts debated the psychology of betrayal. Was this a crime of passion? Could a woman, intelligent and stable, be pushed into a moment of irreversible violence? Mariah's journal entries, spanning months, revealed a slow burn of growing suspicion. Cryptic lines hinted at sleepless nights, tracking apps, fake social media accounts used to follow Anthony's movements. One entry, dated just weeks before the murder, read, "I watched him kiss her through the cafe window. She smiled like she knew he belonged to her. I wanted to scream." The prosecution closed with a chilling summary. She didn't just snap. She simmered. She watched. She waited. And when the moment came, when the mask slipped, she made sure he couldn't lie again. The jury deliberated for nearly 2 days. On the third morning, they returned to the courtroom. Silent. Stern. Mariah Jennings was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter and aggravated assault. The jury, moved by her trauma but bound by the facts, could not accept the claim of complete self-defense. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 9. The sentencing drew reactions across the spectrum. Some hailed it as justice for a man whose life was taken. Others mourned the prison bars that would now hold a woman who had once been known only as a teacher, a mentor, a loyal wife. In the weeks that followed, Denise gave birth to a son. She named him Elijah. She never showed up for any more interviews. Moved out of state. Disappeared from social media. But she did leave a single message on a parenting forum, under a private profile. It read, "He'll never know his father. I just pray he never asks why." As for the retreat center, Cabin 9 was quietly removed from their listings. Never rented again. The staff speak of it in whispers now, like an echo no one wants to trace. And Mariah? She sits in a cell 2 hours south of Atlanta, teaching GED courses to other women serving time. She writes in her journal. Still reads every letter from her sister. Still keeps a copy of her wedding photo tucked in a worn paperback. But she never speaks about that night, not even once. What began as a peaceful retreat, a getaway meant to reconnect, to find clarity, ended in bloodshed. One moment of confrontation in the stillness of Cabin 9 became a lifetime of questions. Betrayal, grief, deception, and rage collided in the quiet of the woods, leaving behind a broken family, an orphan child, and a woman with a past she can never outrun. This was not a case of chance. It was a case of choices, made in silence, carried in secrets, and paid for with a life. But stories like this don't just happen to strangers. They unfold in neighborhoods we know. In families we think we understand. They grow slowly, behind closed doors, beneath polite smiles, and carefully composed photos. Until one decision shatters it all. What would you have done if you were in Mariah's shoes? Do you believe justice was served? Was this murder, or was it survival? We want to know your thoughts. Share your theories in the comments. And if this story gripped you, if it made you pause, question, or feel something, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another case that challenges what we think we know. More stories like this are coming. Some resolved. Some still waiting for answers. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and never assume you've seen everything. Because truth is always stranger than fiction.